In this movie, we're going to talk about making reports. Reports are columns of numbers, and if you look, here's section 3.1 in the book, which talks a lot about reports. And most everything we're talking about, page 101, you can see here, um, everything is talked about in the book. We just know that people don't like to read books, so that's why we offer it in a movie form also. But to make a report, here we got some kind of V8 power curve here on the screen, something we ran. Click on report up here at the top. And the first thing is pick individual items, which is what 99% of you are going to be doing. And here's the items you can pick from: recorded raw data channels or some calculated channels like brake spec, corrected torque and horsepower and stuff. And then there's RPM Accel times, which you can see disables a lot of this stuff. And RPM Accel times typically is more important, is used by people doing inertia dynos. But anyway, we won't get into that too much. And you have two different types of reports: time or RPM report. Most people are, again, for doing dyno work would want an RPM graph. If you do an RPM graph, it's not going to allow you to do all data, just like on a graph screen also you cannot do all data because again, with what we talked about, part throttle data being averaged in with wide open, we don't want to have that happen. So anyway, but you can set up all your specs here. We're doing an RPM or report. What kind of starting RPM do you want? Start at 2,000, maybe you want to go to 8,000. RPM increment is disabled because we've set up the program to have these increments match whatever's on the main screen, which is currently a 200 RPM increment. It's not asking what kind of time format because we're doing an RPM graph. Do you want to include averages? Let's say no. And then let's pick something out we want to do. Let's say corrected torque and horsepower here versus RPM. We're going to make a report. And you see, even though we asked for it from 2,000 to 8,000, there was no data for that available. So here we have dyno torque. That's the raw torque number. Here's corrected torque. This is fuel, which is a fuel pressure, and corrected torque and horsepower over here. And the peaks are marked here with the peak. And you could print this report, clicking on print, Windows printer setup, print results, a lot of options of what you want to include in the report and such. But another thing I want to show you is the ability to open, edit, and save these settings. If you've set up a certain type of graphs combination of settings here, you can then save them to some name for recall in the future. Now I've done that with this because I know what I want to do here. And here's well, let me show you how to do this first. Let's say we like these settings here. This is a standard type of report we want to make over and over again. 2,000, 8,000, the RPM report for power run number 1. Like I said, the filtering and the RPM increment are being determined by what the settings are on the main screen. That's a preference setting. If we turn that preference off, we could then change these also. So let's say we want to save this under a name to be recalled in the future. Let's say it's, and what else is being done here? With no averaging, okay? So that's what we're going to call this, and we click on Save, and you can see this new report format has been saved. Let's go pick out one of the others here. Now you can see all these settings we got here. If I just click on that and click OK, it's going to load all these settings in. So I don't have to type things in each time, don't have to try and remember things. And let's make this kind of, I'm sorry, I didn't want to do that. I want to click on Make Report. So here is that type of report, and we included some averages here. I'll show you. We're including averages from 3,600 to 5,000 RPM. And that's what these asterisks mean here, that we are averaging the data over that RPM range, even though we're showing you everything from 3 to 52. Now you can make them match, so you have an asterisk in each one of them, and then you get an average for everything shown here. And here's the averages over that RPM range where the asterisks are. Another type of report is, let's pull out this other one here. Make that report. You can see there's more columns here. Here's air fuel. Here's boost, which in this case this was not a supercharged engine. This is actually manifold vacuum. You can see manifold vacuum goes up. It's a negative number because it's a vacuum. You could have that specified as a positive if you change the calibration in the DataMite specs. And you correct the torque and horsepower, and again, the averages here. Another thing with reports that you're going to want to do, and this is available only in the Pro, some of these things are only available in the Pro version I've been showing you, is you might want to do comparison tests. You can see up here we got multiple tests. If you look here, a little information down here, we can do multiple tests. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, how do you want to do your multiple tests? Do you just want to show a side-by-side comparison, or do you want to include the amount of difference between that side-by-side comparison? I'm going to say include the difference, okay? And what it did here is it went to what we call our history log of things we've recently done, and whatever you put a yes in this report column, and I'm going to scroll down over here, and you can see we only got yeses in these top three. We're comparing the current run, this top one, with two other runs. There could be a little bit of difference, some modification, jetting or something. And you get the report of what we got here, where we have the base that we're comparing, 14, and we're comparing to run 13 and run 12. And here's the air fuel. Here's the averages. Again, the axis is showing you the RPM range for the averages. This run was average of 1163, this one is 1156, and this was 1166, the average air fuel. And the difference shown that this is down by 0.07 and this is up by 0.03. And you can do the same thing on boost, which is vacuum. You can see they're almost identical, which you'd expect vacuum to be almost identical. And here we got the torque and horsepower differences. Here, this happens to be corrected torque for run 13 and run 12 and run 14. And here's the average corrected torque, very close, and the corrected horsepower. And again, you could print this. Or maybe you just didn't want both of them. Maybe you just want run 14 and run 12 compared. Click there, and now you're only comparing 14 and 12 with the difference shown here. Or if you go like that, we get rid of the difference column, and you got those two there being compared. Maybe you don't want this air, fuel, and boost. You can go to report type. You can either deselect these two like that, make the report. Now everything else stays the same, but all we're doing is corrected torque and corrected horsepower. Maybe this will fit on your sheet of paper better. And that's the report we got there. Now your more advanced users may want to use this option here, this Ascii file options, where you can print out, or not print out, but you can save to a file this data for use in, let's say, like something like Excel or something, some other type of spreadsheet program, or for some other data analysis, or if you just want to email that file to another user, it'll make a file that you can email. So it'll make a text file or an Ascii file. So what you could do here is you could say something like, oh, I want to include the text, which means these things like corrected horsepower, the labels of things. And maybe we want to include the comments and the test summary info. Test summary info is this information up here. Comments are the comments for the file. And let's say we want to save it to a certain file name. I'll just call it and then what we can do is we can go to something like Windows Explorer and actually see what that file looks like. And here's what it looks like in Notepad. File comments, didn't have any comments, I guess, and here's the other information here. Or this would probably may not import well with all these words and the peak and all that kind of stuff there. We can export it differently. Back in the program, I'm going to say don't include the text or all those comments. We're going to save it to a file. Yep, I want to overwrite. And now if we go and look at that file, you can see it doesn't have nearly the amount of words in it. Now, being a comparison test with these side-by-side comparisons, it does include some things here. If this may or may not work for you for what you're trying to do. You could also get rid of the comparison, cancel out of here, just do a single test, and now file, saved a file that already exists, overwrite it. And that's what it looks like now. So that gives you some options for the more advanced users who might want to write an Ascii file for inputting into some other kind of spreadsheet program. And as you can see, that is also covered in section 3.2 in the book. So reports give you a nice way of doing side-by-side comparisons or listing out numbers of data from your tests. Before I conclude, I want to show you something here. If we go to graphing, I believe it is, increments and filtering match the main screen. If we turn that off, now you can see we can change the amount of filtering in our reports and the RPM increment. Before, when we had everything matching all over in the program, what's on the graph, now what's on the reports here, and what's on the main screen, they must all be the same. And that is to ensure that your peak torque and horsepower numbers match at all different places in the program. So what I could do now is I could change the filtering from heavy to light and the RPM increment from 200 to 500, make a report. Now you can see we got 500 RPM increments.